Good afternoon. My name is Chuck Ridgway, Automation Technology Manager here at Horner. It's Tuesday. It's time for another live stream. Today's topic is all about using custom fonts with our Horner OCS controllers. And I'm going to go ahead and bring in my friend and colleague, Mr. Casey Gardner. How you doing today, Casey?
Hey, not too bad. How's it going, Chuck?
It's going well. So we both know there's plenty of applications where custom fonts can be really useful. Can you think of any recent use cases where that was certainly the case?
Yeah, I think we remember one particular application where we were actually using smaller screen controllers, but the customer ended up wanting more visibility for their text in that case. So they were actually viewing the screens from farther away, which they have pretty high resolution screens, so they would look good, but the default fonts don't allow you to go large size just because usually they'd fill up the screen pretty quickly. So using our custom fonts, we were able to load a much higher or a much bigger font and be able to display numbers and letters at much bigger sizes and much clearer to the customer in this case as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's certainly one case. Another case is where maybe you have you need a character set that isn't included in kind of the standard ASCII type character sets. You know, some sort of foreign type fonts that you might find, you know, Cyrillic for Russia or maybe one of the Asian fonts. So certainly plenty of cases. And today in the demo period, I'm going to definitely be showing how to put a bigger font on an XL4, for instance. So that's really just illustrates what you were just talking about. Okay, so Casey's going to be manning the chat. So he'll be answering any questions you have. If you're watching this live, just type them in the chat section. If you're watching this on replay, no problem. Type in your questions, but instead of the chat, you're going to do it in the comment section. We'll get it answered, but just non-real time. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. All right, here's an outline of our program for today. We're going to talk about fonts and how they work in the Horner OCS products. We're going to talk about some font tools that are available in Cscape. We've got a font editor, a font manager, and a font creation wizard. So those are different tools you can use in adding of custom fonts into your project. Of course, we're going to do demonstrations. We always like to do that whenever we can. Going to give you some tips and tricks so that you can take those with you so that your results will be exactly what you're looking for. And then the XL Plus 15-inch model actually has a slightly different approach for importing fonts. It's very simple. We'll go ahead and review that towards the end. Okay, let's get rolling. Okay, so when would you use a custom font? Now, Casey and I both talked about a couple cases when you need a font of a different size or that has maybe a different shape. Maybe you need a tall and narrow font or a just tall font in general. Or maybe you need a font with a different character set than what the built-in fonts feature. Maybe you need a Unicode font that can support kanji or one of the other Asian written languages. Or as I mentioned in the opening, Cyrillic, which is what you're going to need for Russian. And there are literally thousands and thousands of characters that have been defined. ASCII fonts are the legacy type fonts that are out there with typically 128 characters as standard, and even extended, you're looking at a maximum of about 256. Whereas with Unicode, those fonts, literally, there's hundreds of thousands of characters available in Unicode. So that's what to be aware of. Now, there is a bit of a trade-off, though, and that is Unicode fonts are huge in terms of memory usage. So you got to be careful with Unicode fonts for sure. But again, whenever you have kanji or Cyrillic type characters, that's just a couple of examples where Unicode is going to be required. Okay, so Horner OCS controllers, of course, offer a variety of font sizes with their built-in fonts, but they also provide, or we also provide in Cscape, with additional tools that allow added fonts to be imported. Now, the imported fonts have to end up in the right format. So for a bulk of the OCS product line, that is a format called FNT, which is really kind of a custom OCS font. All right, and that is, again, in all models except for the XL Plus 15. All right. Now, in the case of the XL 15 Plus, you can take true type fonts and just directly use those. All right. So in the case of an OCS, XL4, for instance, you start out with a true type font. You have to do a conversion in Cscape. you end up with an FNT file. With the XL15 Plus, you start out with a TrueType font, and you just go straight in there. Okay, let's talk a little bit about the font tools that are available in Cscape. There's 3 of them. You've got the Font Manager. Okay, what's the Font Manager for? Well, it's to manage the addition of custom fonts or deleting custom fonts, or even to replace a custom font that you may have been using previously and you want to replace with a slightly different one. There's also a font creation wizard, and this is like a lot of wizards. It's basically a tool that allows you to import a font and add it to your project in kind of a semi-automatic process. So you don't have to follow as many steps individually. It kind of walks you through the entire process. And then we have a tool called a font editor, which could be used to kind of manually import a font, or maybe even, if you were really creative, to create a font from scratch for use in the OCS. So it'd be a pretty weird use case, but it's definitely a possibility if you're talking about the font editor. But today we're going to spend most of our time talking about the font manager and the font creation wizard, because that's for the most part what everybody's using these days with the OCS and custom fonts. Now, the font editor, this is a tool that could be used if you want to draw a font from scratch. And again, we're not going to spend a lot of time on this today, but I at least wanted to mention it to you. Again, if you had a font where you actually wanted to do something like edit the font on a pixel by pixel basis, you could use the Cscape font editor to actually do that. Okay, again, not a very common use case, but it's there. And then in the font editor itself, it can support fonts up to 64 pixels high. Okay, so with some of our smaller OCS units, they don't offer any fonts that are bigger than 20 pixels high. For instance, in the case of the font editor tool, it can handle up to 64 pixel high fonts. However, even though we do have the font editor, the font creation wizard is really what most people use, because again, it kind of walks you through the entire process. And it can also support larger fonts yet. So the font editor can support fonts up to 64 pixels. The font creation wizard can handle fonts up to 200 pixels high, okay? Now, it also does provide some important control over which parts of the character set are imported. Remember when I talked a little bit about Unicode fonts before? I said you literally could have hundreds of thousands of characters. Well, you're not going to want to import all those characters in if you're only going to use, say, the normal characters that are part of the ASCII command set. You know, the numbers, the letters, parentheses, periods, commas, those sorts of things. Okay, you're only going to want to really import that ASCII part of a Unicode font. So the font creation wizard does give you the ability to select just the part of the font that you want. And then when you've made those selections, it can automatically for you add the font you've just imported into your current Cscape project. And you'll see this when we do the demonstration. Okay, so the Cscape Font Manager, again, the details on that guy, it will show you at a glance which custom fonts are included in your current project. So which ones you've already imported, which ones are already in use, okay? And it'll also show you their size in bytes. And why is the size important? Well, there's a limited amount of memory available in OCS models for custom fonts. In that chart I've shown over there on top of the screen capture, you can see that that varies anywhere from 256 kilobytes. In the case of the micro OCS, it can support up to 256 kilobytes. In the case of the X5, the XL4, on the way up through to the EXL10, they can support up to 4 megabytes. And in the case of the XL15 Plus, it can support up to 50 megabytes. So again, micro OCS can support up to 256K. Most of the rest of the product line can support up to 4 meg, but the XL15 Plus can support 50 meg. Okay. Now, in addition to kind of loading up files for use in your current project, again, it also allows you to remove fonts from your current project if that's the case. And one thing that's important to mention is that after you're done creating your project's complete using your custom fonts, you don't necessarily have to keep track of those FNT files after that, because those fonts that you used in your project will be stored within the CSP file. Now, if you want to use that custom font on a future project, okay, of course, at that point, you're going to want to keep track of that FNT file so you can use it on a future project. But you don't have to worry. If you email or send the CSP file to a colleague to have loaded inside of a controller, the font information will be in there, even if your colleague doesn't have the FNT file on his copy of Cscape. Okay, let's go ahead and get into our demo now. All right, so what I'm going to be working with for the demo is an XL4, and let's take a quick look at that XL4. I've got a need in this demonstration to show you how to view an RPM value for an engine along with an engine status. And as you can see, I'm using pretty small fonts here. So let's imagine if we're standing right in front of the screen, we would probably design the screen far differently and it would be perfectly viewable and clear, but you would need to be close to the screen. Now, if what we're looking for are large fonts that can be viewed from a much longer distance, then we'd want to potentially use custom fonts. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, I'm going to go ahead and fire up Cscape for this project. Anytime we're working with custom fonts, we're going to be working in the graphics editor. So let's go to the graphics editor, go to View Edit Screens. As you can see here, I just have text fields using the standard fonts. Okay, in this case, it's the largest font that's available in an XL4 built in, and that's a 20 pixel font. Okay, so this happens to be at the bottom here. This is an ASCII field. The one in the middle is just an integer data field for RPM, and then this is just a plain text field for a title. So in this demo, I'm going to show you how to come up with a very large font for our RPM value, and then I'll come up with kind of a large and skinny font, or a tall and skinny font for our engine status. Okay, so let's start out in Tools, Font Manager. And this will show us what custom fonts we're using in the project currently. And as you can see, there aren't any. Next, let's go ahead and go to the Font Creation Wizard, because I don't have the large number font that I want to create quite ready yet. Okay? All right, so the first step in the Font Creation Wizard is it asks me, do I want to import an ASCII font? So just the lower 128 characters. Do I want to import a complete font, which includes all the Unicode stuff? It's going to be huge. I wouldn't select that one. Or a custom font, in other words, some subset of the full Unicode, but maybe more than the base ASCII. I'm going to go ahead and select the custom one here. That's probably the most illustrative. All right, I'll hit Next on the wizard. Next, I have to decide what font it is from my computer that I want to import into Cscape. Now, any font that's loaded on your computer is going to be available on this list here. And I happen to have one that I've installed on my computer a while back. It's called Crash Numbering Gothic. It's got some really nice looking large numerals. So we're going to select that guy. And font wise, I can select all the way up to 200 pixels. But the problem with the 200 pixel font is a lot of those pixels are taken up under the baseline for things like the tail on a G lowercase or a tail on a lowercase y. So I'm not going to be able to fit 200 pixels and position the numbers where I want them if I have that big area under the baseline. Because remember, I'm displaying numbers here, and with numbers, there's nothing under the baseline. So I'm going to go ahead and go with, let's say, a 150 pixel font. So let me go ahead and squeeze down here. Let's go ahead and find 150 on the list, approximately 150, and that's probably about right. So 150 pixels on the font size. Now, in terms of the characters that I want to bring in, this is the starting and ending section of the character set. And if I take a look at this lookup table, it shows me all the different sections, starting from this first section here, which is C0 controls in basic Latin, all the way down through literally, geez, what are we talking about here? Over 100 different sections of characters in the font. In my case, I really am just interested in that first section. That's got the numbers and the letters in it. So I'm going to just go ahead and say OK. Make sure that's the first section. The start and the end is the first section. Next, I need to type in the name of the font that I'm going to call this. Remember, we're taking a font from our computer and we're creating an FNT file. which needs to go in the Cscape fonts directory. So I'll hit browse here. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and type in crash num 150. So that's the font I want to create here. All right, I'll hit save. All right, it's done that. Next, I want to decide, do I want to add this generated font that I'm getting ready to create? Do I want to automatically add that to my current project? Sure, why not? Let's go ahead and leave that checked. And then the last step in this dialog is hit create font. So we do that. It basically goes through and creates all the characters and creates the new FNT file. It imported 95 characters, so not all 128 were in use by this particular font. That's pretty typical. And I'll go ahead and hit finish. Okay, so now I should be ready to use that font, but let's just go ahead and verify that it came in okay and see what size it is. So I'm going to go back to the font manager. And sure enough, there's the font we just imported, okay? And I'm going to take a look at that size. Now, it's 242,000 bytes. So because of that, it will actually fit in any OCS if it's the only font. So in the case of a micro OCS, it's got 256K available. This is below that. We'd be good to go. I'm currently programming in XL4. It's got 4 megabytes available. It'll definitely fit. Okay, so I'll hit OK here. Now let's go replace this standard font here with the font we just imported. So I'll go to the pull down list, and sure enough, there in the bottom is the new font I just imported. Let's see what happens when we hit OK. Wow, nice big characters. Now, one thing we need to keep our eye on. You'll notice that the tops of these characters are being shown outside of the boundary box for this data object. That means the top of the threes won't be shown, or the top of the numbers won't be shown. We need to make this bigger. Okay, so we need to size this so that the numbers completely fit within the boundary of that object, and they do now. So that should look pretty good. All right, so we've went ahead and we created a font from scratch, and now we've got things looking like they're going to be displayed much the way we're looking for. Now, we also wanted to come up with bigger, maybe taller, skinnier characters for our engine status as well. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on this ASCII data field. And again, I don't want to use that, big number font for that. That's not going to work. So let's go ahead and import another font, but this time let's import a font that I had previously created. So in that case, I can just go straight to the font manager, and I can hit add font, and I can find the font that I'm looking for if it's one that I've previously created. And sure enough, under Agency FB60, that's the font I'm looking for. It's added to the list. It's about 227K. Individually, it would fit in a micro OCS, but alongside another font, it probably wouldn't. But again, I'm dealing with an XL4, so I have plenty of space. I hit OK. And now when I go in here and double click, I can see that now, yep, I've got yet another font added to the list. I'll say OK, and then see how that one looks. Now you'll see that it's taller and skinnier. You'll also see this particular font has quite a bit of area allocated below the baseline for like the tails on a lowercase y or lowercase g. So I don't have the flexibility of moving it any further down on the screen than it currently is set for. So that's a capability I don't have, is to place a object outside of the boundaries of the screen. So that's about what we're looking at here for the engine status. I'm going to go ahead and bump up the numbers a little bit here. I think that's going to end up looking good. Okay, now let's see what this looks like on the actual XL4 itself. Now, the first time you do a program download, after you've added fonts into your project, that download takes quite a while because the fonts actually have to be downloaded to the controller. So here's a hint for you. You can use your memory card and do an export to removable media on that download, and then it'll go lickety-split. So let's go ahead and do that now. Instead of doing a download, which is very possible and will work just fine, it just will take longer for this demo, I'm going to go ahead and hit File, Export to Removable Media. All right, I have a microSD memory card there. I'm going to go ahead and overwrite this program that's already on there. Okay, that's a previous version of the demo that I did. And then I'm also going to verify that the version of file that it is creating is compatible with the version of firmware I'm using. So I happen to know that on this XL4, it's using firmware version 15.52. So I have to pick a version that's less than that for the PGM file. 1549 is less than 1552. I can go ahead and create that. Let me go ahead and put -PGM on the bottom here and hit save. Program has been successfully exported. Okay, very good. Now let me go ahead and pop out the memory card. All right, and I'm going to go ahead and pop that in the OCS. And let's switch over to our XL4 view. Still running our old program, as you can see. All right, let's go to the system menu and take a look at that file that's on removable media. Okay. I will hit enter for that file. It says, am I sure? And as you can see how quickly that file loaded. So much faster to load fonts from the memory card. Hey, that looks pretty good. So it looks like we accomplished what we were after. We got nice big readable numerals for the RPM numeric value, and the text for the ASCII text field of engine status is showing engine normal and nice big readable text as well. So I'm pretty happy with what that looks like. Fantastic. Okay, so let's go ahead and head back to, well, before we do that, let me show you another font that I've used with a Micro Series OCS before that I think looks pretty good. I'll just go ahead and do that because some of you may be using the Micro Series. Now, again, just to verify, this particular font will work fine in a Micro, as will this particular font, because they're both below 256K. It's just you couldn't use them alongside each other. But let me go ahead and add yet another font to the project. So I'm going to go back to the font. Well, let's do this. Let's just start from scratch with a new Cscape file, just so that we're clear. Okay. Doesn't matter what logic language I'm selecting. They're all the same when it comes to font support. I'll go to the hardware configuration. Instead of configuring this file for an XL4, I'll select a Micro Series, and let's go ahead and select, let's select a Micro Series X7. Okay, it's telling me I only support 250 screens. That's not a problem. I'll say okay. We'll go ahead and head straight to our graphics editor. Let's put a data field on the screen. Just make it a title. We'll pretend it's a numeric data field. Okay, we'll pick the biggest font that's available here, which is only 20 pixels. And you can see that's relatively small. Let's find us a nice bigger font for a Micro OCS. So I'm going to go back to my Tools Font Manager, hit Add, and another font that I like is called DSEG 160. So I added the 160 part. This is a 7-segment font that looks kind of like the old, like a 7-segment reading you might see on your multimeter or something. Kind of cool. May not want to use it for your project, but I thought I would point it out. Okay. So again, it will fit nicely on a Micro OCS because it's below 256K. All right, and now when I go back in here and take a look at what that font looks like, I hit OK, and there we go. You can see nice big numbers that we could easily see across the room. Okay, so that's an example of another large font, really large, really, even bigger than the last one, that will, again, work in a Micro OCS if the main thing you want to add from a custom font standpoint is large numbers. Okay. That's what I wanted to show for the first part of my demos there. Let's go ahead and head back to our material now. Okay, let's talk about just a few tips and tricks here. Remember, only import Unicode fonts if you're going to use them because they take up a lot of space. Import only the character subset you need, again, to save space. You can find fonts on the web. Just search for TrueType fonts. You want to find fonts. You know, many of them are free, and many of them that aren't free are very economical. And make sure you don't violate anybody's copyright, okay? The fonts that I imported were fonts that were free to use, okay, for commercial use. And so I was very careful that I don't violate anybody's copyright. So that's something to keep an eye on. Also, of course, like we did many times, always check your font memory usage to make sure the font will fit. More tips. I talked about the fact that there's quite a bit of space taken up by fonts under the baseline in some cases. So be aware of that. And just like I did on my demo, if you've got a large numeric data field, consider eliminating the legend and the border, get rid of the background color. That'll give you the most flexibility to put it where you want it, put that data field where you want it. Now, lastly, I want to talk, before I move on to the XL15 Plus, I do want to give credit where credit is due. There were two different fonts that I used in this demonstration, the crash numbering font as well as the DSEG font. So here are the authors of those fonts. Again, I didn't violate their copyright or their license, their use license, but I want to give them credit. Okay, so now let's take a look at how fonts are handled in the XL15 Plus, because it's a little different, a little more straightforward, frankly. Basically, the XL15 Plus can directly handle TrueType fonts. Remember with the XL4 and the Micro OCS, as we were demonstrating, we were using TrueType fonts, but we were using tools in Cscape to convert those TrueType fonts into a format that the OCS could handle, and that's an FNT format. Now with the XL15 Plus, it can handle TrueType fonts directly. So what's the process look like for using those fonts? Well, effectively, you need to go into the area of Windows where your TrueType fonts are already installed, and that can be found in the control panel under Appearance and Personalization, and then a fonts folder. And in there, you'll find it just chock full of TTF files, which are TrueType font files. And then what you're going to want to do is copy some of those files, the ones that you want to use in your XL Plus or XL15 Plus project. Make a copy of those particular TTF files and copy them into the fonts folder under Cscape. Okay? Once you do that, then you can go back into Cscape, and then using the font tools that are available for the XL15 Plus, you can then select the fonts that you actually want to use in your project. Okay, let's show that to you in real time. Okay, so let's go back to Cscape. I'm going to start out by pointing out that this is an XL15 Plus project. I'm going to minimize it though to show you where in Windows all those TrueType fonts are located. Here's my control panel, Appearance and Personalization, and then Fonts. All right, and you can see just a whole bunch of font files. And I just copied one in this case. I copied one called Stencil, I believe. Yeah, Stencil Regular. I copied that into my Cscape fonts folder. There it is, right there, the copy of that TTF file. Okay, so now if I go into Cscape and I want to work on my screens and include that particular font in my project, go to the graphics editor. Now when I go to Tools, I see that the only font tool I have available with the XL15 Plus is Select Fonts. So when you do that, now all the files, all the TTF files that are sitting in that fonts folder are available to be selected for this project. And I only put one there, so there's just one available. So I hit OK. All right, and now you can see it's showing me how much I've used of my 50 megabytes that's available for the XL15 Plus, and it's just a fraction. I say OK, and now when I put something on the screen, a data field or a text label, whatever the case may be, and I go to select a font, Stencil shows up. Now what's interesting is, with these imported TrueType fonts, you can choose the size independently. You don't have to choose strictly a single size. So I could select a 28 point size here for this data field. I could then basically copy and paste another data field and say, hey, I want bigger text on this one. And I could go ahead and go with a 48 point for this data field. So as you can see, the nice thing about the XL15 Plus is when you import a font, you have a whole bunch of different sizes to choose from. Whereas with the OCS and the Micro OCS, every time you import a font, you're importing it at a specific size. So that's what's involved with fonts and the XL15 Plus. So that pretty much covers what I wanted to cover today for custom fonts in the OCS. I'm going to go ahead and bring back Mr. Casey Gardner. Hey, Casey. Okay, so any questions today?
Haven't seen any yet. We'll give it another minute or two, but I'm not seeing any.
Okay, I know that I haven't used as many custom fonts with the XL15 Plus as I have with my other controllers, so that was a little bit of a learning experience for me today as well. So just figuring out and basically just reviewing that different approach, which is actually quite a bit simpler for the XL15 Plus. So anyway, if you have questions and you're watching this on replay, again, just type them into the comment section and we'll get those answered. All right, now I want to make sure to mention that don't forget to subscribe. If you do subscribe and you click on the bell, you'll get notification whenever we go live, as well as notification for any scheduled videos we have and any other videos that we upload. All right, I do also want to mention that next week we have another 2 o'clock YouTube live session, and we'll be covering using WebMI as a large screen production monitor. So that should be a good program. It's a really, it's a fairly simple process. I'll be showing it to you step by step, and we think it'll be worth your while to be sure. Okay, so thanks for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again next week, and everybody stay safe out there.